day engineering economics class. In today's video, I'll just be discussing the concepts of introduction to engineering economy, including also the design processes and those concepts that might be very helpful in your future problem solving. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, when we talk about engineering economy, we're always finding the solutions to engineering problems with economic merits. And above all, we need to have this promotion of well-being and survival of organization, the embodiment of creative and innovative technology and ideas, then the permission and identification and scrutiny of their estimated outcomes, and lastly, the translation of profitability to the bottom line through a valid and acceptable measure of merit. Now, these concepts should always include the principles of engineering economy. And there are seven of them, so you can read about it from this screen, the development of the alternatives, and up to this revisiting of your decisions. But I'm much more concerned with how this design processes works in engineering economy. Now, we have seven of them, and this is some kind of reflection to the scientific method that we know in science. Because the first step, as you can read from this screen, is actually the problem recognition, and that's the same thing as the first step in scientific method. And then you develop alternatives for or feasible alternatives for the second step. This is something like the proposed solution or the possible solutions that can be that can deal with the problems that you have recognized. And then the third one should be the development of the outcomes and cash flow for each alternative. So this number three is actually the you're actually experimenting in this method. And then after that, after you've already experimented of all the alternatives, you will be able to uh, select the criteria or the criterion based on what is actually needed. And after that, you'll be able to analyze and compare each alternative. So usually the 1 to 5 steps are the steps that we always do whenever we solve problems, even if it's not an engineering economy problems, especially when we're dealing with problems with a lot of alternatives. And then finally, we select the best alternative, and hopefully for number seven, we'll be able to monitor or post evaluate the results. Now, these concepts or this design process will not be complete without the terms that are always used in engineering economy. And I want you to memorize this term. I mean, not exactly the definition, but some of the ideas behind these cost concepts. Okay, and the first one is the fixed cost. And when we talk about fixed costs, we're referring to the cost that is unaffected by changes in activity level over some feasible range of operations. Now you can read it from here. The example would be the taxes on facilities, administrative salaries, license fees, and interest costs on borrowed capital. Now, these fixed costs, especially your salary, doesn't really increase because the company is not capable of increasing that. That's one of the reasons. And then we usually fix these things so that it becomes available to the public. I mean, when the public knows that this is the salary that you've been getting, so they would have this established idea that, oh, I'm getting that certain salary at that company, so I can apply for that job. So, having known the fixed value of these costs, then we'll be able to understand more of the activity of a certain alternative by that case. And of course, when we talk about, let's say, license fees do not actually increase from time to time because for the reason that those costs that are actually standardized, they don't usually change from time to time. That's why they're called fixed costs. Now, the opposite of these fixed costs are the variable costs. It is abbreviated as CV. Now, when we talk about the CV, it depends on, you can read it from here. It actually depends on the quantity of output and the measures of activity level. Example of this is your material and labor used in product or services. So imagine if your company producing something and the cost of production is different because you're trying to use raw materials that are actually imported, and then the importation cost or the freight cost tend to increase or even decrease, or it's not constant. So knowing these factors, what you have to do is to adjust your cost of production in a way that it matches your um, labor cost or even the shipment. So in that case, this is not a fixed cost but a variable cost because it is actually changing. So the basic idea here is that if you think that the cost per product is actually changing, then that should be a variable cost rather than being a fixed cost, which is usually encountered by salaries and license fees. Now, incremental cost, based on this definition, is the additional cost or revenue that results from increasing the output of a system by one or more units. So the example of this is actually the production of barrel oil and an incremental cost to the state of education of a student. Now, as you can see here, it's stated here that this is quite difficult to determine in practice because when you say incremental cost, um, the changes can be reflected in a way that it's an increment, or there is a certain system that can measure this incremental change. But if we're talking about change, we can always say that that should be a variable cost. And that's why the reason, and that is actually one of the reasons why this incremental cost is very difficult to determine, because usually the engineers will always confuse this with being a variable costs. And one of the best example here is the education system of student. We know quite well that a tuition fee is kind of a fixed cost, but it's actually increasing from time to time because the need for the development of, let's say, the student needs to have this certain activity conducted in the laboratory, where in the laboratory is requiring a lot of different equipment. So basically, as technology progresses, the need for education is also increasing, and of course, the facilities are changing. That's why um, the tuition fees would always something like be increasing in this way. So in essence, the state of education of a student would be having this incremental cost from time to time. And that is one of the reasons why of educating a student is actually an incremental cost. You can always consider this incremental cost in a way that, imagine you being a kindergarten student, and then you just have to spend very little for your education, and then when you go to college, it's actually increasing because the requirement for knowledge and of course the requirement for you to learn something new based on your course is actually increasing. Okay, so now we move forward to the indirect costs. Now, these indirect costs are very easy to understand because these are costs that are difficult to allocate a specific output or work activity. Now, the examples here that are given are the for the direct labor hours, as well as the electricity, general repairs, property taxes, and supervision. So, why do these indirect costs are actually, I mean, why do these utility or these attributes are called indirect costs? Now, these are called so because there is no such thing as direct allocation for this specific output. For example, electricity, the unit for electricity is, let's say, kilowatt hour. So it doesn't really translate to certain amount of money, but it's just um, it's just a measure of the power that is actually being consumed by a certain household. So knowing this amount, these are actually indirect costs because we're simply assigning a certain monetary value for those utilities or for this certain service or work. That's the same thing as your general repairs. Now, for the general repairs, for example, you want to buy something for the replacement of this material. Right? Let's say you needed a screw and then you want to buy something for this to have this equipment fixed. So these costs are actually can be very easy to compute because they're you can just use the monetary value for the things that you would buy. But the service for these repairs, as well as the time it takes for the repair, are not really that easy to um, converted in a monetary value. That's why these are called the indirect costs. So how about these standard costs? These standard costs are those that are actually planned or established before the actual production or the service delivery. So you can actually think of this as the anticipated direct labor hours, materials, and overhead categories, such as the established cost per unit. So unlike this actual uh, direct labor dollars, these are actually the anticipated direct labor hours. So um, this is usually done before the production of a certain material. Let's say we're planning to have this production of a certain product. Let's say production of a dishwashing liquid. So that's our product for the next month. So the standard cost will be the suggested retail price for
Pasok mga suki, sa sampu lang, 20 lang, 30 lang, sige.
for this certain product, and it is something like a fixed cost plus where is that one? It is something like a fixed cost in the future, but this standard cost is more of it's more on the actual computed value based on the production anticipated production rate, and of course the cost of labor that is actually included in this material production. Now for the cash cost, this is actually involved in the payment of cash and results in the cash flow. So later on you'll be able to understand more on the cash flow. It's just that when we have cash flow and when we have payments done, and then it results to cash flow, wherein we needed to add more payments just to complete the necessary payment to cover up all our indebtedness, then we will call this the cash flow. So later on you'll be able to understand more on this. Now, the book cost, on the other hand, is the one that doesn't involve any cash transaction and is reflected in the accounting system. So this is usually represented by the recovery of past expenditures over a fixed period of time. And an example of this is the depreciation charged by the use of assets like plant equipment. So remember, if you have an equipment and you always use that certain equipment, the book value or the book cost is actually changing because basically it is no longer the original equipment that you've bought. And in that cases, when we're not actually considering that, um, you couldn't actually think of this monetary value as if it's um, the exact amount we're in. Okay, as time passes by, this certain equipment is changing by 1,000 pesos per, let's say, 5 days. So there's no rule for that. That's why it couldn't be reflected in a certain cash transaction. But either way, we know that the certain value of this equipment should not be the same as its original one, and that is what we call the book cost, wherein we're considering the depreciation charged for the use of the assets, of course, like the plant equipment that I've been talking about. And then the sunk cost. So this one is the cost that has occurred in the past and has no relevance to estimates of future costs and revenues related to the alternative course of action. That's why a sunk cost is common to all alternatives and is not part of the future of cash flows and can be disregarded in engineering economic analysis. So later on, you'll be able to understand more on this sunk cost when we talk about depreciation, but this is actually disregarded. You can always read the definition here. So ganun nga siya kasi we usually disregard the sunk cost, but sometimes it plays a vital role in a certain analysis when we will be using a certain method to solve for the book value of a certain equipment. Now, for the opportunity cost, This is the cost incurred because of the use of limited resources, that the opportunity to use this resource to monetary advantage in alternative use is foregone. And then the life cycle is cost, is the term used for the summation of all the costs related to product, structure, system, service, and during its lifespan. So this is called the life cycle because we're talking about the start of its phase of the cycle, which is the investment cost. So this is the cost that, of this equipment when you buy it, so or also the capital that is required for this acquisition. And then after acquiring this equipment, you'll be using that. So included in that usage will be the operation and maintenance of this equipment, because you just can't let your equipment be like that. You need to maintain it, and you need to usually or always check repair it, because you have to you have to use this equipment in its most efficient way possible. So you have to maintain that and then always repair that. So that includes your operation and maintenance cost. And then finally, if this equipment is no longer needed, or the operation has to shut down, as you can read from here, or you have to replace this. So the disposal cost will be that end of its life cycle, even though sometimes it's not yet um, destroyed, or even if the equipment can still be used, for as long as it's no longer needed in your production plant or whatever or wherever. It could always mean that that will be the disposal cost, and most of the time this is equated to what we call the salvage value, which later on you'll be able to understand what it means. But to give you an idea about the salvage value, for example, you want to sell something. Let's say you have um, a phone or a cell phone, and then you don't want it anymore. You want to sell it for a certain lower price because of this book cost, that is actually the depreciation charge. So therefore, the certain book value minus this investment cost will give you the salvage value, which is actually the cost that you'll be selling this certain unit that you have. And that's mostly what happens when we talk about the cost concepts of a certain product. So that is mostly the cost concepts and design economics of our engineering economy. So we have these fixed costs up until the life cycle costs. Now, how do we deal with the general economic environment? So basically, when we talk about this environment, we're considering not only the costs of a certain material, but also those people who actually buy this product, as well as those people who produce this product. And of course, the material that you need to produce them. So, so the first one is the producer goods and services. So these are actually the machine tools of factory buildings, be it buses or farm machinery, that is able to produce the consumer goods. And of course, if we're talking about the machine tools, this is not actually the machine tools themselves, because sometimes if it's semi-mechanized, it needs to have a person operating behind it. So basically, we're talking about the group, or let's say people plus machine, that are actually producing goods. So if your company is producing a product, then you might as well want to call yourselves as the producer goods and services. So this is not limited to production of a certain product, but of course, the services that are actually offered. For example, do you have you heard of this Sip Sip Poso Negro? So they're offering actually a different kind of service, but they fall under this producer goods and services, because they're actually providing the service, and that's it. Now for the next one, what we have is the consumer goods and services. Now when we talk about this consumer goods and services, we're actually referring to those that are being consumed to satisfy the people. As you can read from here, these are the products or services that are directly used by people to satisfy their wants. So that means that if, for example, you bought a new dress, or you bought your new shoes, so that falls under clothing. So for every product that satisfies your needs, wants, and that actually includes food, homes, cars, TV sets, and all these material that would satisfy your needs and wants, of course, they are included in the consumer goods and services. So basically, you can usually think of this as the product that you can see, those being sold in the market. These are usually the consumer goods and services. Now, how about utility? We've been hearing utilities for quite a long time, and this is the time that we give a formal definition for this concept. So, based on this, the utility is the power to satisfy human wants and needs. So, this is mostly measured in terms of value expressed in some medium of exchange to the price that must be paid to obtain a particular item. So, one very good example of utility is electricity. And electricity doesn't have any price. I mean, technically, it is measured in a different medium based on this definition, and then the medium is what I would call that the kilowatt hour or the power. So in this case, we are assigning a certain price for this certain medium so that we can obtain this certain utility so that it can satisfy our human wants and needs. That's the same thing that goes for water. So water is actually computed based on the cubic meter of the water that you've been consuming or that you have consumed in a month. So in that way, we can actually assign a certain price for every cubic meter of water that you've used in a past month. And then with that, we can actually have you pay for that certain amount. Now it says here that engineering economy focuses on increasing the utility value of materials, and that is one of the best reasons why we should study this engineering economy, because we want to live in a world where the utility is almost free. Take for example, some other countries are actually having their utilities free. I mean, I don't know. I'm not really sure if that's the case, but of course they have their own um, land topography, so they can actually have a different setting based on the renewable energy. But then again, they are able to efficiently utilize this energy, and because of that, because of these studies, then they were able to reduce the cost for the charge for this utility, that instead of like paying a lot of hundreds of dollars or probably the currency they're using, so they're able to reduce that because of the correct usage of this analysis of engineering economy, as well as the utilization of technology for producing these utilities. Now, these necessities, luxuries, and price demand. Now, I've already know quite well that you've read or you have heard about this necessities, luxuries, and price demand. So when we talk about necessities, these are the products or the services that you actually need in order to live. And then the luxuries are actually those that um, you might want them, but you don't actually need them. Now, for example, food is actually a necessity because humans can survive without food, but a computer is a luxury because humans can actually survive even without a computer. But I mean, technology wise, when we talk about computers, and especially in this case of pandemic, it is almost a necessity. But then again, if you think about living without it, you can actually do it. So basically, it still doesn't fall under the necessity that that must be bought in order to live. Now, another example of this necessity is your home itself. So you need your home in order to shield you or cover you from any disaster, natural disaster like typhoons or probably a very cold or hot weather. So in if you're at your home, then you'll be able to save your life in such very bad cases. Now, how about this price demand? So a price demand is literally um, the relationship that exists between the selling price of a certain product and of course the demand multiplied by a certain variable. We call this variable the slope of that certain linear or probably a curve of our function. So later on, you'll be able to understand more of this price demand. But then again, this is usually represented as P is equal to A minus BD, where A is the intercept of the price, and then negative business slope, and this your demand. So we move forward to the competition, and then we usually have two of them, though there are certain modified types of competition, but we'll just stick with these two. So the first one is the perfect competition, wherein it occurs in a situation in which any given product is supplied by a large number of vendors, and there's no restriction or additional suppliers entering the market. Okay. And then the last one will be the monopoly. So it is the opposite pole of perfect competition. So this happens when a certain vendor is selling a certain product and he's the only one selling that. So you have no choice but to buy from his from his store, because he's the only one selling that kind of product, and you don't have any other options. But then again, this rarely occurs in practice because, well, in practice, we usually want to have a lot of options, and a perfect competition is the best one because it is a healthy competition rather than having this monopoly. Now, imagine if you're living in a certain place wherein there is a Jollibee, because that's one of the most favorite fast food chains of the Filipinos. So there is this Jollibee. And then after walking some like 15 steps from this Jollibee, you'll be able to see something like Mang Inasal. And then going further, let's say 20 steps, you'll be able to see some greenage here. Okay, so you can see some three of the largest fast foods that we have or that we know in your vicinity. So my question is, uh, does this have a perfect competition, or um, is this a monopoly, if you still want to justify this as monopoly? So for this case, I want you to answer this. I'll be sending this at your email. The question would be something like that. So you need to answer if it's a perfect competition, explain your stand, and but if in a case where you would answer monopoly, then you must also state your reason why it is called a monopoly, if that is your answer. So you just have to say, again, I want to repeat this. You'll be receiving a certain question at your email that will be something like your first activity in this subject. It's just that you'll be able to finish that by simply replying to the email. Okay, and then state your reason if you choose your perfect competition or monopoly. Okay. So that is for this discussion. So when we talk about total revenue, this is the product selling price and the number of units sold. So basically, this is what we call the kita na sa Tagalog natin, yung kinita natin. So, di ba, may binenta kayo, you sold something. Let's say, for example, you sold 1,000 units of notebook. And then this notebook is costs. It costs, let's say, kano ba notebook ngayon? 50 pesos. Joke, 20 pesos. Actually, wala talagang alam. Ano na lang, 30 pesos per notebook. So 30 pesos, and then you were able to sell 1,000 of them. So your kita or your total revenue would be this 1,000 times 30 pesos. So that is your total revenue. Now, the relationship of your um, price and the demand can be given by this expression AD minus BD squared. Now, if you want to maximize your total revenue, what you have to do here is to just take this expression of total revenue and then um, differentiate it with respect to the demand. So B, A and B being a constant, so you just have to, let's say, actually, it's already written here, but let's do it again. So if you have an equation that is TR that is equal to AD minus BD squared, and you know very well that A and B are constants. So if you want to take the maximum total revenue that you can get from this certain demand, then you will be differentiating this expression with respect to the demand and then setting that equal to 0. So the derivative of this expression would be A minus 2 BD. So with that said, the demand, I mean the demand that will maximize your total revenue would be something like D is equal to A over 2B. So this is that certain demand. Of course, if you're given by A and then B, so that will, of course, a case that will be a case-to-case basis in this problem. So with that, this is the reason why in a curve like this, which is the total revenue, the maximum total revenue will exist at a point wherein the demand is A over 2B, as is proven by calculus. So the reason is that most of the time, as our demand increases, we'll come to a point wherein the total revenue would be increasing. But as we proceed in producing more of these products, the demand is not actually increasing anymore. Why is that so? Because we have this general concept in economics that as the demand increases, we can say that I mean, as the supply increases, the demand decreases. Because basically, if all the people have been supplied by this certain product that they need, will they be needing this product anymore? So if you still wanted to produce these kind of products, and even though all the people have been supplied by these products, then you should be expecting that the demand should be decreasing, and then your supply is actually just increasing and increasing. So basically, what you have to deal with that is that you produce something that would just meet the maximum demand of the consumers, and then probably stop after producing that certain demand, or try to resort to having something like lessening the supplies or your production rate, or probably modifying things just to change the curve. So how about these cost volumes and break even point relationship? So when we talk about these costs, we can refer to this as the total cost, and that's actually the sum of the fixed cost and then this variable cost. Now, when we talk about the total variable cost, we're referring to the variable cost per unit times all the number of units that have been, let's say, sold. So the scenario one is that when we have a profit loss. So in Tagalog, ang profit loss, tinatawag natin na lugi. Okay. So minsan lugi tayo, 'di ba? Ganito tayo. Lugi tayo pag maaga tayong gumising, walang kalase. Pero ba't ba natin nasabi na lugi tayo, no? Lugi tayo kasi meron tayong in-invest. And then in this case kasi in-invest natin yung ating time para gumising ng maaga, which is masarap kasing tumulog lalo pag malamig. So the thing here is that if we convert that to money, let's say a profit loss. So yung kita mo, and then sinubtrakan natin to ng cost sa pag-produce nung product na binebenta mo. Kapag negative yon, meaning hindi ka tumubo, kaya nga lugi ka eh. Tinatawag natin yan na profit loss or simply loss. And that's the scenario 1. In short, wala kang kita, lugi ka pa. Okay. Now for the scenario 2, I'm not referring to this scenario 2, okay? I mean, we're referring to the scenario 1 and then something like A, B, C. So the first under scenario 1 is the profit loss. And then for the second one, tubo naman yung ating tinutukoy dito. So a profit that is positive. So we call this, we usually refer to the profit that is positive, or just simply the profit as the positive one. So when we say I have a profit, then actually I'm referring to the positive value of your profit. So if you have this total revenue minus total cost, then that would be positive. So ano ba yung mga cases na meron tayong tubo? For example, hindi ka nag-aral and then hindi ka nag-aral and then walang exam. Tapos yung iba nag-aral tapos wala palang exam. So basically, ikaw yung tubo dun kasi nakatulog ka ng maaga and then wala namang exam. So basically, yun yung parang isang reasoning natin when you say tubo ka, diba? Pero in monetary value, when you try to sell your products and then you're able to go past your investment costs. So therefore, meron kang tutubuin dyan kahit piso pa yan. So you will be able to say na, okay, tubo pa rin ako kahit piso. Okay? And how about kung ang profit natin is zero? So that's the time when we talk about this break-even point. So that is when you have something like investment and then nabenta mo lang is parang bawi lang talaga, as in zero yung profit mo. So with that said, na-meet mo lang yung break-even point, pero wala kang tinubo. So, in short, napagod ka lang din. Okay? Yung isa lugi, yung isa pagod lang, yung isa is tubo naman. So, parang ganun yung ating mga certain notions natin sa Filipino. Okay. Now, for the scenario 2, um, the profit can be solved using this equation, but I'll just be skipping this for now, and I'll be digging deeper into this when I try to solve problems regarding this topic. Okay. Now for scenario 2, as you can see from this equation, we have this AD minus BD squared, which is actually the representation of your price demand. So the equation, the graph of this equation is something like a curve or parabolic curve. So with this, we know quite well na as the demand increases, when we've reached our certain maximum profit, yung demand natin or then tsaka revenue, nagde-decrease na siya as we increase the volume of our demand. That is because, yun nga, ito yung ating behavior ng ating graph as well as dun sa ating tendency ng ating supply is masyado ng marami. That's why the demand is actually decreasing. And that's actually what happens in a more real scenario. But there is another scenario too wherein the graph is actually a straight line. So as you can see here, as this volume increases, so technically you have these losses if you don't have enough volume that of the demand. For example, you try to produce a certain amount of oil and then you're able to sell that oil, but of course because you're not producing a lot of oil, so yun nga, instead of just producing a lot, na-produce mo lang is 3 peraso, 4 na peraso. So you're not able to meet your investment cost and then you're at total loss. So that is the case that's happening here. But after increasing the amount of or the rate of production and then you're able to produce more oil, so kinuha mo na lahat yung mga posibleng way, pati yung oil natin sa mukha, nilagay na natin para dumagdag pa sa kita. So, joke lang. Pero yun nga, because we're able to produce more oil and we're able to meet the demand that needs to be met, and then meet natin yung break-even point, and then as we go or move further in the volume of our demand, then mag-increase yung ating cost. But of course, meron man tayong revenue in that case, and that's the profit. So basically, itong linear type na ating mga price demand or price per unit na equation, usually this increases as the volume of the demand increases. So basically, ano ba yung mga products natin na ganon? Like in this pandemic, the face mask face masks are very important because parang necessity na ata natin yun ngayon sa new normal eh. So, ito yung parang trend natin na parang linear yung ating graph sa mga face mask because people constantly need them, especially yung mga disposable face masks as well as our frontliners. So with that being said, they have to produce a lot of these face masks, and the trend of this price demand or this equation would still something be like linear instead of the one that looks like this one. So ganun yung difference natin scenario 1 and scenario 2. But of course, goal lang dyan is to see what the equation of the profit looks like or what is the equation of the price demand. Now, how about this present economy studies? So, in all of the economy studies that we'll be discussing, there are only 2 rules that we have to understand in, of course, selection of our economy studies. So, rule number 1, when revenues and other economic benefits are present and vary among alternatives, choose the alternative that maximizes overall profitability based on the number of defect-free units of a product or service produced. So, syempre, hindi niyo siya na-gets, pero I'll just be describing this maximizes overall profitability. So, lahat ng ating i-evaluate dito will be considering the overall profitability of that product or service. So, makikita niyo siya, let's say for example, enough ba na tingnan ko lang yung ating cost per unit? Enough ba na tingnan ko lang yung fixed cost? Or is it better na gamitin natin yung total cost considering all the products that are not wasted? So, ganun siya ine-evaluate. And then, so, For rule number 2 naman, when revenues and other economic benefits are not present. So in short, hindi natin pwedeng makita kung may kita siya or wala. So what we'll do here is that we'll be considering the costs and select the alternative that minimizes total cost per defect-free unit of product and service output. So instead of having this revenues na i-consider natin, kasi usually we talk about profits here for rule 1. Pero if it's not possible, then we need to select the alternative that minimizes the total cost. So in short, kung meron pala tayong certain product or service na mababa yung ating maging investment cost, then that will be the one that we need to select. Okay. So with that being said, I think that's the end of our discussion regarding these concepts of engineering economics. And I think I'll be leaving these exercises for the next video para mas focus yung ating next video for problem solving only. So I hope na mas na-gets nyo siya yung mga concepts natin. Though hindi talaga siya naintindihan ng ganun kabilis pag pag just discussion about this. So I'm hoping na I can show you this during our video discussions regarding this problem solving, and I actually have a lot here. And basically, these are the present economy studies. We'll be evaluating this based on the total revenue, the profit, the losses, and we need to compare which alternative would be the best. So these are basic, basic comparisons. We're still not yet to this topic wherein we'll be considering all the attributes present and yung mga hindi natin pwedeng i-associate with monetary value. But in this case, I'll give you a glimpse of how this is solved using our methods here that we know. Okay, so I think that's all for this subject, and I hope mas nailiwanagan kayo kung ano ba yung introduction natin sa engineering economy and what we'll be dealing with this topic. Okay? See you.